a guide to turning wanting into wealth. You can want something with your whole chest and still end up with empty hands. That is not a contradiction. It is the most common story in the world. A man wakes up wanting more money, more freedom, more room to breathe, and he goes to bed that night having done nothing to earn any of it. He is not lazy in the way we usually mean the word. He is busy. He is tired. He simply never converted the wanting into anything that could be measured, tested, or built upon. Desire, by itself, is only heat. It is not the fire. Heat without fuel and structure dissipates into the air and warms nothing. A furnace works because heat has been captured, contained, and directed through a system that turns it into something useful: steam, motion, power. Desire works the same way. Left loose, it just burns off as anxiety, daydreaming, envy, and vague plans that never quite become real. Captured and organized, it becomes the engine that actually moves a life forward. Almost everyone who has ever wanted more has felt the same series of sensations. The tightness that comes from bills that outpace income. The private daydream of what would change if the money simply arrived. The flash of admiration and a little bit of envy when somebody else's success crosses your path. All of that is real. None of it is nothing. But notice what happens the moment you ask a person to be specific. Ask them exactly how much they want, by when, doing what, for whom, in exchange for what value, and the clear feeling turns to fog. That fog is the tell. It reveals that what felt like a plan was actually only an emotion wearing the costume of a plan. Wealth does not answer to fog. It answers to precision. I want to be comfortable gives your mind nothing to work with. Your mind cannot build toward comfortable. It can build toward, I want to clear $8,000 of debt in 14 months by adding a second income stream from freelance design work. One of those statements is a wish. The other is an assignment. Only one of them can be broken into Tuesday's task list. This is the first shift a person has to make before anything else matters. Stop treating I want more as if it were a plan, and start treating it as a signal that a plan is needed. The wanting is not wrong. It is simply unfinished. Before you can hit a target, you have to be able to describe it to someone else in one sentence. Most people never do this. They carry around a general mood of financial dissatisfaction and call it a goal. But a mood cannot be pursued. Only a target can be pursued. Sit with a harder question than how much money do I want? Ask instead, what would that money actually be for? The answer changes everything about the plan you build. If what you actually want is freedom from debt, your plan will be built around aggressive repayment, reduced obligations, and a firm ceiling on new liabilities. If what you want is capital to start something of your own, your plan will be built around savings velocity and risk tolerance. If what you want is the ability to support people you love or a cause you believe in, your plan will be shaped by giving capacity, not just accumulation. If what you want is simply the quiet confidence of never being caught short again, your plan will emphasize reserves and insurance against shocks more than growth. Notice that none of these plans look alike. A person chasing debt freedom who copies the plan of a person chasing investment capital will find that the plan doesn't fit. Not because either plan is wrong, but because they were solving different problems. This is why borrowed goals so often fail. You inherited someone else's definition of wealth and tried to walk their road with your own legs. There is a quieter danger hiding underneath this question, and it deserves to be named honestly. Many people who say they want wealth actually want the appearance of wealth. They want to look successful more than they want to be secure. This confusion is expensive. It leads to income that rises right alongside spending, so that a raise never actually changes anything. It simply raises the ceiling on what gets spent trying to look the part. A house that photographs well but strains the budget every month. A car that announces arrival but delays retirement by 5 years. None of this is a moral failing, so much as a planning failure. Nobody stopped to ask what the money was actually supposed to accomplish before deciding how to spend it. So before you write a single financial target, write a single sentence answering this. What does money let me do that I currently cannot do that actually matters to me? Everything downstream of that sentence has a chance of holding together. Everything built without it tends to collapse the first time it's tested by a difficult month. One of the quietest ways ambition dies is by insisting on a perfect plan before taking a single step. This looks like diligence from the outside. It feels like diligence from the inside. But very often, it is simply fear, dressed carefully, buying itself more time. No plan is born correct. Every plan you have ever heard of that eventually worked was revised, corrected, and rebuilt dozens of times after contact with reality showed its weak points. The founder's original business plan almost never resembles the company that eventually succeeds. The investor's first thesis gets refined through losses long before it produces consistent gains. The plan is not a monument you carve once. It is a living draft that improves precisely because you were willing to expose it to the world early enough to learn from it. This means your job is not to build a flawless plan. Your job is to build a plan strong enough to survive its first contact with reality and humble enough to be corrected afterward. A plan that can survive contact and adjust is worth infinitely more than a beautiful plan that never leaves the notebook. Ask yourself honestly, am I still researching because there is genuinely more to learn, or because starting is uncomfortable and research feels safer? There is no shame in the second answer. Nearly everyone lives there at some point, but naming it honestly is the only way out of it. Here is a law that governs almost every dollar that has ever changed hands, honestly. Money moves toward whoever solves a problem, removes a difficulty, saves someone time, reduces someone's risk, or makes someone's life measurably better. It does not move toward desire. It moves toward usefulness. This reframes the entire question. Instead of asking, how do I get more money? Ask, what problem can I get unusually good at solving? What difficulty, common to a specific group of people, can I learn to remove better than most of the people currently attempting it? What skill, if I built it seriously over the next 2 years, would make me difficult to ignore in a market that already exists? These are not soft, feel-good questions. They are the actual mechanism by which income increases in a market economy. A person who becomes excellent at a real problem rarely has to beg for reward. Reward tends to follow usefulness the way shadow follows shape. It is not guaranteed, and it is not always fast, but it is far more reliable than hoping. There is dignity in this arrangement, even though it can feel severe. The market does not owe anyone wealth simply because they want it badly, but it does reward with real consistency whoever keeps improving their ability to serve a genuine need. Luck cannot be summoned on command. Skill, reputation, and judgment can be built on command slowly by anyone willing to put in the hours. Long before wealth arrives, there is a set of things already fully within your control right now, regardless of your current bank balance. You command your daily habits. You command how carefully you study whatever you claim to want to master. You command whether your word, once given, can be relied upon. You command how your hours get spent. You command the standard you hold your own work to, even when nobody is checking. This matters because it is tempting to treat wealth building as something that begins later, after the next raise, after the debt is smaller, after conditions improve. But the muscles that eventually manage large sums of money are the same muscles you're using right now on small sums. If a person cannot track, budget, and direct a modest paycheck with any discipline, a much larger income will not create discipline out of nowhere. It will simply give an undisciplined habit a bigger stage to perform on. This is why the smartest place to start is not with a windfall you're hoping for, but with the resources already sitting in your hand. Know exactly what comes in and what goes out. Respect small amounts enough to track them accurately. A habit of carelessness with $5 rarely transforms into carefulness with $5,000 just because the number got bigger. If anything, larger numbers tend to amplify whatever habits were already present, good or bad. None of this is about becoming stingy or joyless with money. There's an important difference between fear-driven hoarding and purposeful direction. A person ruled by fear of spending is not free. They are simply governed by a different master. The goal isn't to spend nothing. The goal is for every dollar to have a job, some assigned to necessities, some to growth, some to reserves, some to the occasional guilt-free enjoyment that keeps a plan from feeling like punishment. Money with an assignment tends to behave. Money without one tends to disappear and leave you wondering where it went. General ambition has no earning power on its own. Nobody gets paid for wanting to be good at something. They get paid once they actually are. This means every serious financial plan eventually has to answer a specific question. What do I not yet know how to do that this plan requires? Be blunt with yourself here. Does the plan require you to understand how to sell without feeling embarrassed about it? Does it require basic financial literacy, reading a balance sheet, understanding compound growth, knowing the difference between an asset and a liability disguised as one? Does it require you to learn negotiation so that value you create doesn't quietly leak away in conversations you didn't prepare for? Does it require a technical skill specific to your field, one that would make your services meaningfully harder to replace? Name the gap honestly, and then build a study habit around closing it. Not a vague intention to learn more someday, but an actual recurring block of time devoted to it. Nobody begins any worthwhile pursuit already knowing enough. The people who eventually succeed are not the ones who started with more knowledge. They're the ones who treated their own ignorance as a temporary condition to be worked on, rather than a permanent identity to hide behind. Be careful, too, about where you get your instruction. It is worth asking, before taking someone's financial advice seriously, whether their own results reflect the advice they're handing out. This isn't about arrogance or dismissing people who haven't succeeded. Some of the best cautionary lessons come from watching what didn't work for someone else. But there's a meaningful difference between studying a failure to understand what to avoid and mistaking someone's confident opinion for proven experience. Seek out people whose results you can actually observe, not just people who are comfortable giving advice. And guard against becoming a permanent student who never acts. Reading about a skill is not the same as practicing it. At some point, the studying has to convert into an attempt, because the market will teach you things no book ever could. Let real responsibility finish what theory started. It's tempting to imagine wealth as something built by a single determined person, working in isolation, refusing help. In reality, almost no lasting financial success is built that way. Even the most independent-seeming entrepreneur depends on customers who trust them enough to pay, employees who trust them enough to show up, and partners who trust them enough to lend their own reputation to the effort. This means your plan has to include a serious, honest look at how you treat the people around it. Can people rely on what you say you'll do? Do your conversations create clarity, or do they leave people more confused than before? Do you listen as carefully as you expect to be listened to? Are you looking for arrangements where both sides genuinely benefit, or only for arrangements that benefit you? A plan can look flawless on paper and still fail, quietly, because the person behind it has a habit of treating others as obstacles or tools rather than partners. People notice this faster than we like to admit, and they tend to withdraw their cooperation from anyone who repeatedly uses them, misleads them, or ignores their interests. Wealth that depends on other people's continued confidence, and almost all wealth eventually does, cannot survive a pattern of damaging that confidence. There's a related trap worth naming directly. A plan that only works because someone else doesn't fully understand what they're agreeing to. Gains built that way tend to be short-lived, and they carry a hidden cost even when they succeed. They require ongoing concealment, and concealment is exhausting to maintain indefinitely. A plan built on fairness may grow more slowly at first, but it tends to compound, because trust, once established, keeps opening doors long after the original transaction is finished. Your reputation, over time, becomes an asset in its own right, sometimes a more valuable one than whatever capital you currently hold. A strong reputation lets you borrow confidence when you need it, attract people willing to take a chance on you, and recover credibly after a setback. A damaged reputation makes even money already in hand feel unstable because nobody wants to stay close to it for long. Protect your name as carefully as you protect your accounts. A plan that lives only in your head is not really a plan yet. It's an intention waiting to be forgotten under the pressure of a busy week. The moment ambition is spoken, but never scheduled, it tends to quietly dissolve into the noise of everyday obligations. This is why the plan has to be broken down into duties small enough to actually appear on a calendar. Not build wealth as a task, That's not a task, it's a direction. Instead, what needs researching this week? What expense needs to be cut this month? What conversation needs to happen with a specific person by a specific date? What skill needs 30 focused minutes today? Look honestly at an average day and ask whether it contains any real evidence of the future you claim to want. Does it include study, deliberate service to others, financial order, saving and useful contact with people who matter to the plan? Or does it mostly contain talk about the goal, worry about the goal, and comparison to other people who seem further along? The future is quietly being decided inside your ordinary, unremarkable days, not in the occasional burst of motivated energy that follows a podcast or a good conversation. This points to the actual chain that turns wanting into having. A feeling becomes a schedule becomes an action, repeated action becomes a habit produces something of value, and value offered honestly and consistently eventually earns a reward. Every link in that chain matters. Most people who stay stuck aren't missing desire, they're missing one of the middle links. Some never get past the feeling stage. Some build a plan and never act on it. Others act for a burst and quit the first time it gets difficult. Others build strong habits around work nobody actually needs and wonder why effort isn't converting into reward. Still others create real value, but never learn to make it visible or exchangeable. Find your missing link. It's rarely desire itself. There are 5 recurring forces that quietly dismantle financial plans, and none of them show up wearing a warning label. They arrive dressed as reasonable-sounding thoughts, which is exactly what makes them dangerous. Vagueness shows up disguised as confidence. It says, "I know what I want," while never actually stating it in a form specific enough to be tested. Vagueness is the most damaging of the 5 because it corrupts everything downstream of it. If you don't know precisely what you're building, you can't tell which task deserves your attention first, which opportunities genuinely serve the goal, and which ones merely look exciting. Under vagueness, every action starts to look equally important, when in reality, some actions multiply your progress and others just consume your energy without moving anything forward. The remedy is almost embarrassingly simple. Write the plan down in specific, checkable language. State the target number, the time frame, the method, and the people it's meant to serve. A written plan won't guarantee success, but it will stop you from mistaking confusion for strategy. Delay is more dangerous than an honest no, because it lets you feel like you haven't given up. You tell yourself you're simply waiting for more confidence, more certainty, a better month, clearer conditions. But conditions are never going to arrive in a perfectly convenient package. There will always be some uncertainty left when it's time to begin. The people who eventually get somewhere are not the ones who waited for the fog to clear completely. They're the ones who took the next reasonable step while some of the fog was still there. Break delay by choosing one small, concrete action belonging to the plan and doing it today. Not the whole plan, just one piece of it. Open the account, send the message, finish the neglected task. Movement itself changes what the mind believes is possible. Fear rarely opposes wealth directly. More often, it disguises itself as caution, warning you not to risk what little you already have, reminding you of every past disappointment while conveniently forgetting every lesson you already learned from it. Fear is good at counting what might be lost and terrible at counting what continuing to do nothing is already costing you. Lost time, lost confidence, a slowly eroding sense that you're someone who follows through. The way through isn't reckless bravado. It's asking fear direct questions. What exactly could go wrong? How large would the loss actually be? What would reduce that risk? What's the smallest first step that lets me move without risking ruin? Fear examined this way tends to become useful instruction. Fear obeyed blindly tends to become a permanent excuse. Careless association is the erosion that happens simply from spending too much time around people whose habits and opinions quietly become your default settings. A strong resolve in the morning can be worn down by evening through repeated contact with complaint, cynicism, or casual dismissal of ambition. This doesn't mean cutting people off. It means being selective about whose financial philosophy you allow to shape your own. Ask, honestly, whether someone's life shows the fruit of the advice they're handing you, or whether they're speaking with confidence about a road they've never actually walked. Unmeasured effort is the quiet trap of staying busy without ever checking whether the busyness is producing anything. Hard work deserves respect, but hard work alone guarantees nothing. A person can labor faithfully at a method that simply doesn't work, or serve a need few people actually value, and never notice because they never stop to measure. The remedy is not shame, it's honest tracking. Keep records. Notice which efforts are followed by real results and which ones only produce activity. What gets measured can be managed. What gets ignored quietly takes control instead. Every time money leaves your hand, it makes a small, quiet declaration. This mattered more in this moment than anything else that money could have done. Multiply that declaration by 1,000 small purchases over a year, and you get an accurate portrait of what a person actually values, regardless of what they say they value out loud. This doesn't call for austerity or joylessness. It calls for intention. Spending on necessity, on growth, on tools that genuinely improve your ability to serve or produce, on health, and on obligations honestly owed. All of that supports a plan. Spending driven by the need to appear a certain way to others, by impatience, or by the desire for a quick emotional lift, tends to quietly work against the same plan, dollar by dollar, without ever announcing that it's doing so. Before a non-essential purchase, a short, honest question does a lot of work. Will this strengthen my capacity, or is it mostly here to soothe a passing feeling? Neither answer is shameful. Everyone spends on comfort sometimes. But knowing which one you're doing keeps spending from quietly hijacking the plan without your permission. Note, too, that controlling spending without ever increasing what you earn tends to keep a person's ceiling low, no matter how careful they are. And increasing income without any control over spending tends to keep a person exactly as stretched as before, just with bigger numbers involved. Real financial ground gets covered when both hands are working together, one hand bringing value in, the other directing it with purpose. Frugality, while necessary, has a ceiling. You cannot save your way into a fortune on an income that barely covers necessities. At some point, a serious plan has to address the other half of the equation. How does the value you offer actually grow? This might mean serving more people with the same skill. It might mean solving a more serious, higher stakes version of the same problem you already solve well. It might mean improving quality until your work commands a different tier of pricing. It might mean developing a skill that is scarcer and therefore worth more in the market you're operating in. It might mean building a system, a piece of writing, a tool, or a trained team that keeps producing value even during the hours you're not personally present. Growth like this rarely happens overnight, and there's an important distinction between patience and passivity. Patience gives time to causes that are actively being strengthened. Continued practice, continued service, continued refinement of an offer that's slowly gaining traction. Passivity gives time to nothing at all and calls the resulting disappointment bad luck. Make sure that whatever you're waiting on is something you're still actively feeding. If you're waiting for a reputation to grow, keep serving at a high standard while you wait. If you're waiting for a skill to mature, keep practicing. If you're waiting for an investment to bear fruit, keep studying and protecting the underlying principle. Time rewards causes that are still being tended, not simply the passage of days. No plan, however carefully built, gets through untested. Every plan strong enough to matter eventually meets some combination of delay, refusal, financial loss, misunderstanding, and fatigue. This is not a sign the plan was foolish. It's a sign the plan has entered the real world, where every serious goal gets tested before it gets rewarded. Here's where most people quietly go wrong. The first real setback arrives, and instead of examining it, they negotiate with it. Maybe the goal was too big. Maybe I'm not the type of person this works for. Maybe someone else was simply built for this and I wasn't. These conclusions tend to arrive faster than the evidence actually supports them, because they are usually fatigue speaking with more authority than it has actually earned. Tiredness is very good at sounding like wisdom. The more useful habit is to treat every setback as a message that needs decoding, rather than a verdict that needs accepting. A setback might be telling you the plan itself was weak in a specific fixable place. It might be telling you the effort was real but insufficient in volume. It might be telling you a piece of knowledge is still missing. It might be telling you the people you're relying on for support or advice aren't actually equipped to help with this particular goal. It might be telling you the timing was premature, or that the underlying goal is sound, but the method needs to change. Your job, after a setback, is not to decide whether to quit. It's to figure out which of these messages is actually present and respond to that specific message rather than to the general feeling of disappointment. If a plan keeps failing in the exact same place, the answer usually isn't simply try harder in the same direction. More effort aimed at the wrong cause just produces a bigger version of the same failure. Slow down enough to find the actual cause before applying more force to the problem. There's a related trap that deserves a direct warning: comparing your unfinished middle to someone else's finished, visible result. You don't see the debt someone else is carrying quietly, the risk they absorbed, the number of failed attempts that came before the one you're seeing now, or the private cost of what they built. Studying someone's success for transferable principles. Did they specialize? Did they build trust deliberately? Did they control expenses? Did they simply persist longer than most people are willing to? Is useful. Measuring your own worth against their highlight reel is not. Learn the principle. Leave the comparison behind. Panic is expensive. A person in a state of panic tends to sell too cheaply, buy too quickly, promise more than they can deliver, and trust people they haven't actually had time to evaluate. Calm, by contrast, preserves judgment exactly when judgment matters most. Calm under financial pressure is not a personality trait some people are simply born with. It's a capacity that gets built the same way physical strength gets built, gradually, and usually through small, repeated exposure, rather than one dramatic event. If a minor setback is currently enough to derail your entire week emotionally, a larger undertaking will end up commanding you rather than the other way around. Practice steadiness on the small disappointments now, deliberately, so that it's available to you later when the stakes are higher. Part of this steadiness comes from deciding, in advance, how you'll respond if a first attempt doesn't work. Will you study the cause before concluding anything? Will you seek out a second opinion from someone whose judgment you trust? Will you give the current approach a defined period of time before deciding whether to change it? A prepared response changes how failure lands. Unexpected failure to an unprepared mind can feel final. The same failure to a mind that has already built a system for handling it simply becomes the next input to examine. It is entirely possible to earn well and still remain financially fragile, because a plan that governs income without governing use of that income has only solved half the problem. Rising income exposes existing financial habits rather than automatically fixing them. If spending habits were disorganized on a small income, they tend to remain disorganized, just with larger consequences, on a bigger one. This means financial order is worth building before the increase arrives, not after. Keep clear records. Build a reserve for the inevitable rough months. Handle obligations honestly rather than letting them quietly accumulate. Keep investing in your own skills and productive capacity. Be wary of debt taken on to support appearances rather than genuine need. Give generously where it matters to you, but give with the same intention you'd apply to any other use of money, rather than out of impulse or social pressure. Unassigned money tends to become temptation. It sits there without a job, and something will eventually claim it, usually something you didn't plan for. Money that's been assigned a purpose in advance tends to behave far better. This is one of the quieter forms of financial freedom. Not simply having more, but having command over what you already have. There's a final, important safeguard worth naming clearly. Wealth is meant to serve a life, not replace one. A plan that produces money while quietly damaging your health, your closest relationships, your integrity, or your basic peace of mind has technically worked in one narrow sense while failing in every sense that actually matters. It's worth periodically asking a plan some uncomfortable questions. Is this building freedom, or is it quietly building a new kind of obligation? Is it strengthening your character or mostly feeding appetite and comparison? Does it give you more genuine choice in how you live, or does it just give you more to be afraid of losing? Without a clear sense of what the money is actually for, ambition has a tendency to keep moving its own finish line. Enough never quite arrives, because enough was never defined in the first place, only more was. With a clear sense of purpose, growth becomes something you can direct rather than something that quietly directs you. You can keep increasing your capacity while staying rooted in why any of it matters in the first place. Return, one more time, to where this began. Desire is the heat. It's real, it's necessary, and it's also not enough on its own to build anything durable. The heat needs a structure to move through before it can do useful work, a definite target, a written plan willing to be revised, daily actions small enough to actually happen, honest measurement, and enough character to keep the whole thing honorable when nobody's checking. None of this promises instant results, and none of it removes resistance from the process. Resistance is simply part of the road, not a sign you've taken a wrong turn, but a desire that has been made specific, attached to real service, protected from its quiet enemies, and carried forward by daily habit rather than occasional bursts of motivation stops being just a feeling. It becomes a working system. And working systems, given enough time and enough honest correction along the way, tend to produce exactly what they were built to produce. The wanting was never the problem. It was only ever the starting point, spark waiting for something worth catching fire.